And a good morning to all of you bookworms who are joining me for yet another read along with the Chattering Magpie. We are continuing our read of Persuasion, which I hope you have been enjoying so far. I have been having a blast, of course. It's no secret that I really, really enjoyed the beach episode of this book. So unfortunately though, it was ruined by Louisa, who decided to play a little parkour and impress her man with it, but unfortunately it didn't work out for her. Oh my goodness, I wouldn't be laughing if it had been a fatality, okay? But she didn't die, so okay, please excuse me. I just thought it was hilarious. So TLDR, for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, in the last read along we had Anne, our protagonist, go with some friends and her ex-flame. They were engaged, they broke it up years ago, but he's still angry at her and they're pretending not to know each other really. Anyway, so he's really making a show of like pointing it out to Anne by his actions that he's moved on, that he is in search of any other woman in this earth will do except her. So he's been encouraging, if not by words, but by his, actions. He's been encouraging one of the two young ladies in the neighborhood. And this young lady wanted to impress him by saying like, hey, look how determined I am. And so she jumped from some steps and hit her head and passed out. Some of my family would say se rompió la crisna. So yeah, she really did mess herself up a bit and ruined the fun for everybody else. Now a lot of some other stuff happened, not too much, but some important characters were introduced in this trip. So if you haven't read, or if you didn't join us for the last read along, do be sure to, once this read along is done, just listen to the replay. I am sure that you will enjoy it. Now, that aside, now let me just say hello to Early Gang. And okay, Crusher, congratulations. You were the very first one showing here. Now, I don't know if there was somebody before you, because you are welcoming you are welcoming Red. So Red Tempest, I'm assuming that you two erased your comment. Poor dear, I'm so sorry about that. But Crusher bears witness here that you were the first one, so congratulations, Red, and Crusher as well, because Crusher's the first one that shows up. So here, have a whole bunch of hearts. That's not to say that I don't appreciate Akihana, who has always tried to be first and always shares her thoughts, and I always appreciate them. So Akihana, hello. Says, I was glad to have joined last night's chit chat. Yes, because we are one more chit chat away from finishing all of A Sense of a Bookworm pre-pub. So yeah, I'm glad that you joined us despite the late hour. Because I certainly won't be able to join this one. Yeah, I know the time difference is great. So thank you for saying hello though, and I hope you enjoy the replays. So I'll see you next time, hopefully soon. You are, however, in the Discord, so I'm sure I'll see you around. Alright, so you are curious how the idiotic Indinel couple will move going forward. Well, let's see. So far it seems that they have parted ways forever. He's gonna go back to Louisa Musgrove, who broke her head, and Anne is going to go live with Lady Russell. And we all know that, well, we can all assume that Lady Russell is not going to welcome Captain Wentworth anywhere near the vicinity of Anne. So even if he returns from Louisa's side, I don't think they're going to socialize. You know what I mean? So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay. Also, good morning to Little Butterfly. Hello, darling. Happy to see you here as well. And Red Tempest is back. Says my comment is gone. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I figured the comment would have been erased since Red Crusher. Oh my goodness, since Crusher mentioned it, but it was not here. So, but congratulations, and I hope you received my onslaught of hearts. There you go. By the way, you guys, happy to say that the hearts and the reactions, the emoji reactions are back. So, hooray! Thank you, YouTube. I don't know why that was not there before. I'm just happy that they're here. I don't know. It just makes me feel happy. I don't know. Just pushing a button and spamming, it just feels really, really good. I don't know. Okay, so continuing on. Red Tempest says, I was able to be first because I was binge watching the anime. We started yesterday's watch party. Which one was it? Oh, Oshinoko, right? Yes, we started watching Oshinoko, at least I believe when I was watching yesterday, it was with Patrick. And I don't know if you were there, but more likely you joined and then I left. That's been happening recently, Red. I don't know what's going on, but every time I'm about to leave, you're like, okay, she's leaving, I'm gonna jump on in. So I don't know what's the deal with that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed Oshinoko. It's a really fun ride. It's usually not my cup of tea, but I gave it a chance because it was written by the same author as Kaguya-sama, which I really enjoyed, the anime. And so I went and watched Oshinoko, and of course the first episode was just grips you, and so I had to finish it. So I haven't started watching the second season, but that's because I know what happens. I followed the manga until a certain point in the story, and I'm like, I'm just gonna let a few episodes pile up to explain what the effery is going on here. So I'm stalled in the manga, but I'm well enough ahead to know what the anime covers. So anyway, all right. So okay. So Time Lord Boy says hello, how are you? Just reading in the sun. Hope you're enjoying it. The sun. You know what? You stole our sun today. In Southern California, at least where I'm at, it was really foggy, so I know where the sun went. You you took the sun from here. Anyway, enjoy it, because I do need a break from the heat, which hasn't been terrible this year, and I'm grateful for that. It's been in the upper 80s. Sorry, I don't know how to say that in anything else than freedom units, but it's been very pleasant, very lovely summer for me. Just so it's a nice change to have an overcast, foggy morning. Anyway, happy to see you here. Red Tempest says, are you reading with physical book or a digital book on phone in sunlight? Oh, okay, you're asking. Okay. Honestly, if I were to read outside, I would feel really weird reading on a phone or on a digital. I personally like to read with a physical when I'm outside. But then again, I don't have many physical copies in my life. So you can tell how often I go outside to read, which is almost never. All right, so enjoy your time out in the sun. Little Butterfly tells me I posted a meme on the library channel. Ooh, memes. Yes. Let me just pull up Discord. Let me see. Oh, Little Butterfly, those words bring me no end of delight and joy. Anytime somebody tells me I made a meme, I am so here for it. Okay. All right, you guys, please enjoy this masterpiece. That is Bennick reading poetry. Oh no. By the way, thank you for making a meme using one of my all-time favorite animes out there. Yes, indeed. This is from Dangerous in My Heart, which is incredible. I highly recommend it. The first couple of episodes, you're like, what in the world is this? Might take a little bit of getting used to, but I promise you it's a really lovely, wholesome, feel-good, fluffy, romantic. Ah, it's so good. But really, Bennick reading poetry, yeah, the emo boy, the emo man. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. That tickled me, and that made me really, really happy. Thank you, little butterfly. Time Lord Boy replies, I'm old-fashioned. I mainly only read physical. Let me guess, Time Lord. You either have a lot of storage space or you don't have a lot of storage space, but your books have taken over your life. I don't know how else one could just be old-fashioned, and unless you got a book from the library, in which case you're smart. You know, my dream is to be like Rano and have a room full of books. I would, of course, earthquake-proof that room because I live in California. So I would not have such a stupid demise. But that is my dream, to one day have a house where I can have a book room. Let's see. Okay, Red Temple says, Oshinoko, I was there from beginning but couldn't talk since I was cooking then eating, so Patrick put it on English for me. Oh, okay. All right, so, okay, Time Lord Boy also says his books have taken over. I can well imagine. But you know what? It's fine. There are worse roommates to have than a couple hundred or dozen books. So, good on you. I am by no means jealous. Actually, I am not that jealous because I do have several little places where I have my little book stashes here and there, so it's nice to have them around. They're the best kind of decoration a girl could ask for. All right. Ooh, look at you. I give away a lot to charity shops. Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Bravo to Time Lord Boy. Bravo. You are... Yeah, I haven't donated many books in my life. I usually have to sell them because usually the books that I get rid of are like textbooks and stuff, and I am not about to give away textbooks. Anyway, so good on you for donating your books. I'm sure they have found wonderful homes. All right, everybody, let us get started with the read along. I think it is time. We got peeps watching and on the chat. And I gave you guys a TLDR. So basically now Anne is back at Upper Cross, but there's nothing really for her to do. So we'll see what happens. All right. Episode. Chapter. Chapter 13. Six. No, that is a 13. I suck at reading Roman numerals, you guys. I thought that was like a 6 or something. I don't know why I wanted to read 6. All right. Chapter 13. The remainder of Anne's time at Uppercross, comprehending only 2 days, was spent entirely at the mansion house, and she had the satisfaction of knowing herself extremely useful there, both as an immediate companion and as assisting in all those arrangements for the future, which, in Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove's distressed state of spirits, would have been difficulties. They had an early account from Lyme the next morning. Louisa was much the same. No symptoms worse than before had appeared. Charles came a few hours afterwards to bring a later and more particular account. He was tolerably cheerful. A speedy cure must not be hoped, but everything was going on as well as the nature of the state admitted. In speaking of the Harvilles, he seemed unable to satisfy his own sense of their kindness, especially of Mrs. Harville's exertions as a nurse. She really left nothing for Mary to do. He and Mary had been persuaded to go early to their inn last night. Mary had been hysterical again this morning. When he came away, she was going to walk out with Captain Benwick, which he hoped would do her good. He almost wished she had been prevailed to come on home the day before, but the truth was that Mrs. Harville left nothing for anybody to do. Yeah, poor Mrs. Harville, she's She knows that Mary's good for nothing, so she's just like, oh, I guess I'll just have to. I mean, let's give credit to Mrs. Harville. She seems to be a really kind and hospitable lady. But honestly, with Mary around, she can't be depended. Just poor Mrs. Harville. Somebody please, well, yeah, somebody give Mrs. Harville a break, really. Charles was to return to Lyme the same afternoon. His father was, at first, half a mind to go with him, but the ladies could not consent. It would only be going to multiply trouble to the others and increase his own distress, and a much better scheme followed and was acted upon. A chaise was sent from Crewkerne, and Charles conveyed back a far more useful person in the old nursery maid of the family, who, having brought up all the children, and seen the very last, the lingering and the long-petted Master Harry, sent to school after his brothers, was now living in her deserted nursery to mend stockings and dress all the blains and bruises she could get near her, and who, consequently, was only too happy in being allowed to go and help nurse her dear Miss Louisa. Vague wishes of getting Sarah thither had occurred before to Mrs. Musgrove and Henrietta, but without Anne, it would hardly have been resolved on, and found practicable so soon. They were indebted, the next day, to Charles Hayter for all the minute knowledge of Louisa, which it was so essential to obtain every 24 hours. He made it his business to go to Lyme, and his account was still encouraging. The intervals of sense and consciousness were believed to be stronger. Every report agreed in Captain Wentworth's appearing fixed at Lyme. Anne was to leave them on the morrow, an event which they all dreaded. What should they do without her? They were wretched comforters for one another. And so much was said in this way that Anne thought she could not do better than impart among them the general inclination to which she was privy, and persuade them all to go to Lyme at once. She had little difficulty. It was soon determined that they would go tomorrow, fix themselves at the inn, or get into lodgings as it suited, and there remain till dear Louisa could be moved. They must be taking off some trouble from the good people she was with. They might at least relieve Mrs. Harville from the care of her own children. And in short, they were so happy in the decision that Anne was delighted with what she had done, and felt that she could not spend her last morning at Uppercross better than in assisting their preparations and sending them off at an early hour, though her being left to the solitary range of the house was the consequence. She was the last, excepting the little boys at the cottage. She was the very last, the only remaining one of all that had filled and animated both houses, of all that had given Uppercross its cheerful character. A few days had made a change indeed. If Louisa recovered, it would all be well again. More than former happiness would be restored. There could be a doubt, to her mind there was none, of what would follow her recovery. Wait, what? Oh, sorry. There could not be a doubt, to her mind there was none, of what would follow her recovery. A few months hence, and the room now so deserted, occupied but by her silent, pensive self, might be filled again with all that was happy and gay, all that was glowing and bright and prosperous in prosperous love, all that was most unlike Anne Elliot. Oh, Anne! Poor Anne! She's like, everybody's happy except me. This place will be happy without me. Oh, no. Elliot. The stupid Elliot pride. Anne would have been so happy if she had just gotten married and been happy with Wentworth, but no, here we go. Let's see. An hour's complete leisure for such reflections as these. That's an hour too much, darling. You better just go and take a walk or something. An hour's complete leisure for such reflections as these, on a dark November day, a small thick rain almost blotting out the very objects ever to be discerned from the windows. Oh, I guess you can't take a walk. Phooey! was enough to make the sound of Lady Russell's carriage exceedingly welcome. And yet, though desirous to be gone, she could not quit the mansion house or look an adieu to the cottage, with its black, dripping, and comfortless veranda, or even notice through the misty glasses the last humble tenements of the village, without a saddened heart. Scenes had passed in Uppercross which made it precious. It stood the record of many sensations of pain, once severe, but now softened, and of some instances of relenting feeling, some breathings of friendship and reconciliation, which could never be looked for again, and which could never cease to be dear. She left it all behind her, all but the recollection that such things had been. Anne had never entered Kellynch since her quitting Lady Russell's house in September. It had not been necessary, and the few occasions of it being possible for her to go to the hall, she had contrived to evade and escape from. Her first return was to resume her place in the modern and elegant apartments of the lodge, and to gladden the eyes of its mistress. There was some anxiety mixed with Lady Russell's joy in meeting her. She knew who had been frequenting Uppercross, but happily either Anne was so improved in plumpness and looks, or Lady Russell fancied her so. And Anne, in receiving her compliments on the occasion, had the amusement of connecting them with the silent admiration of her cousin, and of hoping that she was to be blessed with a second spring of youth and beauty. And it's like, it's so nice that Lady Russell thinks I look cute, and I'm going to remember the fact that my cousin, Mr. Elliot, also thought I was cute, and hopefully this means that my beauty is coming back. Maybe something good can happen. Yes. I hope that her spirits improve, just as her looks are improving, and deserves it. When they came to converse, she was soon sensible of some mental change. The subjects of which her heart had been full of on leaving Kellynch, and which she had felt slighted, and been compelled to smother among the Musgroves, were now become but of secondary interest. She had lately lost sight even of her father and sister in Bath. Their concerns had been sunk under those of Uppercross, and when Lady Russell reverted to their former hopes and fears, and spoke her satisfaction in the house in Camden Place which had been taken, and her regret that Mrs. Clay should still be with them, Anne would have been ashamed to have it known how much more she was thinking of Lyme and Louisa Musgrove, and all her acquaintance there. How much more interesting to her was the home and friendship of the Harvilles and Captain Benwick than her own father's house in Camden Place, or her own sister's intimacy with Mrs. Clay. She was actually forced to exert herself to meet Lady Russell with anything like the appearance of equal solicitude on topics which had by nature the first claim on her. There was a little awkwardness at first in their discourse on another subject. They must speak of the incident at Lyme, when a full account of the whole had burst on her. But still, it must be talked of, and she must make inquiries. She must regret the imprudence, lament the result, and Captain Wentworth's name must be mentioned by both. Anne was conscious of not doing it so well as Lady Russell. She could not speak the name and look straight forward to Lady Russell's eye, so she had adopted the expedient of telling her briefly what she thought of the attachment between him and Louisa. When this was told, his name distressed her no longer. Lady Russell had only to listen composedly and wish them happy, but internally her heart revelled in angry pleasure, in pleased content, that the man who at 23 had seemed to understand somewhat of the value of an Anne Elliot should, 8 years afterwards, be charmed by a Louisa Musgrove. Ooh, Lady Russell, dang, that lady. I get it though. If I were the same, I would have. If I were her, I would have. And this were my sister. Okay, Liz, if you're listening, sorry, but I had this happen to one of my one of my friends to my sister, okay, dating this good for nothing person. And man, I felt like a Lady Russell. I was so angry. Yeah. So I get, not a Lady Russell that I got my sister and her boyfriend. No, that I did not meddle in her affairs. But when I would just like hear about where he's at, what he's doing, and I'm like, yeah, you let go of something good, and now you get your just desserts. So yes, that's just deserved. I'm sorry, but I actually I don't apologize for being petty like that. Yeah. I get it. When your girlfriend is angry on your behalf. Yeah, or your sister, your girlfriend, whoever is your bestie. This is so real, you guys. And I love that Jane Austen put it in here. Anyway, continuing on, before I speak anything else that's not prudent to be spoken in alive. Continuing. The first 3 or 4 days passed most quietly, with no circumstance to mark them excepting the receipt of a note or two from Lyme, which found their way to Anne. She could not tell how, and brought a rather improving account of Louisa. At the end of that period, Lady Russell's politeness could repose no longer, and the fainter self-threatenings of the past became in a decided tone. I must call on Mrs. Croft. I really must call upon her soon. And have you the courage to go with me and pay a visit in that house? It will be some trial to us both. Anne did not shrink from it. On the contrary, she truly felt as she said in observing, I think you're very likely to suffer the most of the two. Your feelings are less reconciled to the change than mine. By remaining in the neighborhood, I am become inured to it. She could have said more on the subject, for she had, in fact, so high an opinion of the Crofts, and considered her father so very fortunate in his tenants, felt the parish to be so sure of a good example, and the poor of the best attention and relief, that, however sorry and ashamed for the necessity of the removal, she could not, but in conscience, feel that they were gone who deserved not to stay, and that Kellynch Hall had passed into better hands than its owners. Wow. Savage, but the fact that Anne herself is conscious that the Crofts deserve and are better for the neighborhood than her own family, speaks volumes. These convictions must unquestionably have their own pain, and severe was its kind. But they precluded the pain which Lady Russell could suffer in entering the house again, and returning through the well-known apartments. In such moments, Anne had no power of saying to herself, These rooms ought to belong only to us. Oh, how fallen in their destination, how unworthily occupied, an ancient family to be so driven away, strangers filling their place. No, except when she thought of her mother, and remembered where she had been used to sit and preside. She had no sigh of that description to heave. Mrs. Croft always met her with a kindness which gave her the pleasure of fancying herself a favourite, and on the present occasion, receiving her in that house, there was particular attention. The sad accident at Lyme was soon the prevailing topic, and on comparing their latest accounts of the invalid, it appeared that each lady dated her intelligence from the same hour of yestermorn, that Captain Wentworth had been in Kellynch yesterday, the first time since the accident, had brought Anne the last note, which she had not been able to trace the exact steps of, and had stayed a few hours and then returned again to Lyme, and without any present intention of quitting it any more. He had inquired after her, she found, particularly, had expressed his hope of Miss Elliot's not being the worse for her exertions, and had spoken of those exertions as great. This was handsome, and gave her more pleasure than almost anything else could have done. As to the sad catastrophe itself, it could be canvassed only in style by a couple of steady, sensible women whose judgments had to work on ascertained events. and it was perfectly decided that it had been the consequence of much thoughtlessness and much imprudence, that its effects were most alarming, and that it was frightful to think how long Miss Musgrove's recovery might yet be doubtful. Oh, sorry. Let me just read a little bit further behind, because I think I got it wrong. And it was perfectly decided that it had been the consequence of much thoughtlessness and much imprudence, that its effects were most alarming, and that it was frightful to think how long Miss Musgrove's recovery might yet be doubtful, and how liable she would still remain to suffer from the concussion thereafter. The Admiral wound it all up summarily by exclaiming, "A very bad business indeed. A new sort of way this is for a young fellow to be making love by breaking his mistress's head. Is not it, Miss Elliot? This is breaking a head and giving a plaster, truly." Oh, Admiral Croft. Admiral Croft's manners were not quite of the tone to suit Lady Russell, but they delighted Anne, and they delighted this magpie too. His goodness of heart and simplicity of character were irresistible. "Now, this must be very bad for you," said he, suddenly rousing from a little reverie, "to be coming and finding us here. I had not recollected it before, I declare, but it must be very bad. But now, do not stand upon ceremony. Get up and go over all the rooms in the house, if you like it." "Another time, sir. I thank you, not now." "Well, whenever it suits you. You can slip in from the shrubbery at any time, and there you will find we keep our umbrellas hanging up by the door. A good place, is not it? But, checking himself, you will not think it a good place, for yours were always kept in the butler's room." "Aye, so it always is, I believe. One man's ways may be as good as another's, but we all like our own best. And so you must judge for yourself whether it would be better for you to go about the house or not." Anne, finding she might decline it, did so very gratefully. "We have made very few changes either," continued the Admiral, after thinking a moment. "Very few. We told you about the laundry door at Uppercross. That has been a very great improvement. The wonder was how any family on earth could bear the inconvenience of it opening as it did so long. You will tell Sir Walter that what we have done, and that Mr. Shepherd thinks it the greatest improvement the house ever had. Indeed, I must do ourselves the justice to say that the few alterations we have made have been all very much for the better. My wife should have the credit of them, however. I have done very little besides sending away some of the large-looking glasses from my dressing-room, which was your father's. A very good man, and very much the gentleman, I am sure. But I should think, Miss Elliot," looking with serious reflection, "I should think he must be rather a dressy man for his time of life. Such a number of looking-glasses! Oh, Lord, there was no getting away from oneself. So I got Sophie to lend me a hand, and we soon shifted their quarters. And now I am quite snug with my little shaving glass in one corner, and another great thing that I never go near." Remember, you guys, Sir Walter Elliot was vain, and he preened on his own good looks. So everywhere he went in his rooms, there were so many mirrors for him to admire himself. So the Admiral's like, "Yeah, that's too much. I think your father's a little old to be like a fashionable kind of person. So all I want is just a little place for shaving myself, and like maybe another one, but I don't even go near it." I love the Admiral. He's so funny. And the Admiral and Mrs. Croft, they're really some of my favorite characters in this book. Anne, amused in spite of herself, was rather distressed for an answer, and the Admiral, fearing he might not have been civil enough, took up the subject again to say, "The next time you write to your good father, Miss Elliot, pray give my compliments and Mrs. Croft's,
and say that we're settled here quite to our liking, I have no fault at all to find with the place. The breakfast-room chimney smokes a little, I grant you, but it is only when the wind is due north and blows hard, which may not happen 3 times a winter. And, take it all together, now that we have been into most of the houses hereabouts and can judge, there is not one that we like better than this. Pray say so with my compliments. He will be glad to hear it."
Lady Russell and Mrs. Croft were very well pleased with each other, but the acquaintance which this visit began was fated not to proceed far at present, for when it was returned, the Crofts announced themselves to be going away for a few weeks to visit their connections in the north of the county, and probably might not be at home again before Lady Russell would be removing to Bath. So ended all danger to Anne of meeting Captain Wentworth at Kellynch Hall, or of seeing him in company with her friend. Everything was safe enough, and she smiled over the many anxious feelings she had wasted on the subject. End of chapter. Time Lord Boyce says this sounds typical of the English aristocracy. Oh, the fact that Sir Elliot, Baronet, is very into himself, very vain. I could imagine that, the aristocracy is a little bit too obsessed with itself. So I am not surprised that you point this out. I being an empress and a Lady Magpyra, I feel that it's too much to be so self-absorbed. But you know what? I think that if you've been, like the aristocracy, their parents and their parents and their parents and their parents of their parents, they've been so used to just this kind of way of living that it just almost like it's in their genes. So I can imagine that that's how it goes. And as long as you don't have to live with that kind of people, I think you're fine. They're fine. They can do what they want to do. I don't care. All right. Anne, however, she cannot get away from her family. Anne is much more fond of people who are more simple, who are just like, hey, like down to earth. By no means like vulgar, because they're not vulgar. They're just like we're not uppity people. We're practical. We like to have fun, but we're not going to be all about airs and graces here. So she likes people that are just down to earth. Unfortunately, though, her family is anything but. And now that winter is here, she is going to have to go to her family's. And here we go. Though, let me see. I don't know if this is what's happening in this chapter, but I think that's what's happening. I think she goes to Bath here. All right, chapter 14. Though Charles and Mary had remained at Lyme much longer after Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove's going than Anne conceived they could have been all that... Sorry. Though Charles and Mary had remained at Lyme much longer after Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove's going than Anne conceived they could have been at all wanted, they were yet the first of the family to be at home again, and as soon as possible after the return to Uppercross, they drove over to the lodge. They had left Louisa beginning to sit up, but her head, though clear, was exceedingly weak, and her nerves susceptible to the highest extreme of tenderness. And though she might be pronounced to be altogether doing very well, it was still impossible to say when she might be able to bear the removal home, and her father and mother, who must return in time to receive their younger children for the Christmas holidays, had hardly a hope of being allowed to bring her with them. They had all been in lodgings together. Mrs. Musgrove had got up Mrs. Harville's children away as much as she could, and every possible supply from Uppercross had been furnished to lighten the inconvenience to the Harvilles, while the Harvilles had been wanting them to come to dinner every day, and in short it seemed to have been only a struggle on each side as to which should be most disinterested and hospitable. Mary had had her evils, but upon the whole, as was evident by her staying so long, she had found more to enjoy than to suffer. Charles Hayter had been at oh, Mary who hates Charles Hayter, Mary, Mary. Charles Hayter had been at Lyme oftener than suited her, and when they dined with the Harvilles there had been only a maid-servant to wait, and at first Mrs. Harville had always given Mrs. Musgrove precedence. But then she had received so very handsome an apology from her on finding out whose daughter she was, and there had been so much going on every day, there had been so many walks between their lodgings and the Harvilles, and she had got books from the library, and changed them so often, and the balance had certainly been much in favour of Lyme. No, that the balance had certainly been much in favour of Lyme. She had been taken to Charmouth too, and she had bathed, and she had gone to church, and there were a great many more people to look at in the church at Lyme than at Uppercross, and all this, joined to the sense of being so very useful, had made really an agreeable fortnight. Anne inquired after Captain Benwick. Mary's face was clouded directly. Mary doesn't know who Captain Benwick is. Charles laughed. Oh, Captain Benwick is very well, I believe, but he's a very odd young man. I do not know what he should be at. What we should know. I do not know what he would be at. We asked him to come home with us for a day or two. Charles undertook to give him some shooting, and he seemed quite delighted, and for my part I thought it was all settled, when behold, on Tuesday night he made a very awkward sort of excuse. He never shot, he said, and had been quite misunderstood. And he had promised this, and he had promised that, and the end of it was I found that he did not mean to come. I suppose he was afraid of finding it dull. But upon my word I should have thought we were lively enough at the cottage for such a heartbroken man as Captain Benwick. Charles laughed again and said, Now, Mary, you know very well how it really was. It was all your doing. Turning to Anne, he fancied that if he went with us he should find you close by. He fancied everybody to be living at Uppercross, and when he discovered that Lady Russell lived 3 miles off, his heart failed him, and he had not courage to come. That is the fact, upon my honour. Mary knows it is. Ooh, I see. So Charles invited Benwick to go, to visit them, to come with them for some shooting over at Uppercross and Uppercross House. And Benwick was like, cool, yeah, I'll go, which is quite a thing for somebody who's still in mourning and obsessed with poetry. Then he backed off, saying he did not want to go. Turns out that it was because at first he had thought that he would find Anne living with them, and when he heard that Anne was not living with them, was actually living with Lady Russell, and it was 3 miles from their house, he was like, nah. So what does this tell us about Captain Benwick? Oh, Anne, maybe you should, instead of going to Bath, maybe Anne should go to Lyme. I don't know, maybe she can contrive something, right? Maybe? Come on, girl. All right, so hello, Noodle Something's Kimchi says, sorry to be late. I didn't get my notification alert. Oh no. Okay, well, I'm sorry you didn't get it. Or if you did, that you ignored it. Well, I'm happy that you're here. I am reading the second chapter for today, chapter 14. Chapter 13, basically. Anne returned to Uppercross, and then she went to live with Lady Russell. And then with Lady Russell, they went to go visit the Crofts. And all in all, Anne has passed her trials and tribulations. She no longer has to meet Captain Wentworth or see Captain Wentworth with Lady Russell. And so she's like, cool, I no longer have to deal with that. I have overcome this at last. So she thinks that's the end of it all. We'll see. That's about it. All right, let's continue on. That is a fact. Okay. But Mary did not give in to it very graciously, whether from not considering Captain Benwick entitled by birth and situation to be in love with Anne Elliot, or from not wanting to believe Anne a greater attraction to Uppercross than herself, must be left to be guessed. Anne's goodwill, however, was not to be lessened by what she heard. She boldly acknowledged herself flattered, and continued her inquiries.
"Oh, he talks of you," cried Charles, "in such terms."
Mary interrupted him. "I declare, Charles, I never heard him mention Anne twice all the time I was there. I declare, Anne, he never talks of you at all."
"No," admitted Charles, "I do not know that he ever does in a general way, but however it is very clear to me that he admires you exceedingly. His head is full of some books that he is reading upon your recommendation, and he wants to talk to you about them. He has found out something or other in one of them which he thinks, oh, I cannot pretend to remember it, but it was something very fine. I overheard him telling Henrietta all about it. And then Miss Elliot was spoken of in the highest terms. Now, Mary, I declare it was so. I heard it myself, and you were in the other room. Elegance, sweetness, beauty. Oh, there was no end of Miss Elliot's charms."
And I'm sure," cried Mary warmly, "it was very little to his credit if he did. Miss Harville only died last June. Such a heart is very little worth having, is it, Lady Russell? I am sure you will agree with me."
"I must see Captain Benwick before I decide," Lady Russell said, smiling. "And that you are very likely to do very soon, I can tell you, ma'am," said Charles, though he had not nerves for coming away with us, and setting off again afterwards to pay a formal visit here. He will make his way over to Kellynch one day himself, you may depend on it. I told him the distance and the road, and I told him of the churches being so very well worth seeing. For as he has a taste for those sort of things, I thought that would be a good excuse, and he listened with all his understanding and soul, and I am sure from his manner that you will have him calling here soon. So, I give you notice, Lady Russell. An acquaintance of Anne's will always be welcome to me, was Lady Russell's kind answer.
"Oh, as to being Anne's acquaintance," said Mary, "I think he is rather my acquaintance, for I have been seeing him every day this last fortnight." "Well, as you joint acquaintance, then, I shall be very happy to see Captain Benwick." "You will not find anything so very agreeable in him, I assure you, ma'am. He is one of the dullest young men that ever lived. He has walked with me sometimes from one end of the sands to the other without saying a word. He is not at all a well-bred young man. I am sure you will not like him." "There we differ, Mary," said Anne. "I think Lady Russell would like him. I think she would be much pleased with his mind, that she would very soon see no deficiency in his manner."
"So do I, Anne," said Charles. "I am sure Lady Russell would like him. He is just Lady Russell's sort. Give him a book, and he will read it all day long."
Lady Russell's sort, a bookish fellow. Remember, Charles's sisters think that Anne did not agree to marry Charles because Charles was not the bookish type. So he's like, well, this Benwick guy, he likes books, so Lady Russell is bound to approve of him. Yeah, I think it's more than just being bookish, my dear.
Give him a book and he will read all day long.
Yeah, that he will, exclaimed Mary tauntingly. He will sit poring over his book and not know when a person speaks to him, or when one drops one's scissors, or anything that happens. Do you think Lady Russell would like that? Lady Russell could not help laughing. "Upon my word," said she, I should not have supposed that my opinion of anyone could have admitted of such difference of conjecture, steady and matter of fact as I call myself. I have really a curiosity to see the person who could give occasion to such directly opposite notions. I wish he may be I wish he may be induced to call here, and when he does marry, you may depend upon hearing my opinion. But I am determined not to judge him beforehand. You will not like him. I will answer for it. Lady Russell began talking of something else. Mary spoke with animation of their meeting with, or rather missing, Mr. Elliot so extraordinarily. He is a man, said Lady Russell, whom I have no wish to see. His declining to be on cordial terms with the head of the family has left a very strong impression in his disfavor with me. This decision checked Mary's eagerness and stopped her short in the midst of the Elliot countenance. The Elliot countenance. With regard to Captain Wentworth, though Anne hazarded no inquiries, there was voluntary communication sufficient. His spirits had been greatly recovering lately, as might be expected. As Louisa improved, he had improved, and he was now quite a different creature from what he had been the first week. He had not seen Louisa, and was so extremely fearful of any ill consequence to her from an interview that he did not press for it at all, and, on the contrary, seemed to have a plan of going away for a week or 10 days till her head was stronger. He had talked of going down to Plymouth for a week, and wanted to persuade Captain Benwick to go with him. But, as Charles maintained to the last, Captain Benwick seemed much more disposed to ride over to Kellynch. There can be no doubt that Lady Russell and Anne were both occasionally thinking of Captain Benwick from this time. Lady Russell could not hear the doorbell without feeling that it might be his herald, nor could Anne return from any stroll of solitary indulgence in her father's grounds, or any visit of charity in the village, without wondering whether she might see him or hear of him. Captain Benwick came not, however. He was either less disposed for it than Charles had imagined, or he was too shy, and after giving him a week's indulgence, Lady Russell determined him to be unworthy of the interest which he had been beginning to excite. The Musgroves came back to receive their happy boys and girls from school, bringing with them Mrs. Harville's little children to improve the noise of Uppercross and lessen that of Lyme. Henrietta remained with Louisa, but all the rest of the family were again in their usual quarters. Lady Russell and Anne paid their compliments to them at once, when Anne could not but feel that Uppercross was already quite lively again. Though neither Henrietta, nor Louisa, nor Charles Hayter, nor Captain Wentworth were there, the room presented a strong contrast as could be wished to the last state she had seen it. She had seen it in. Immediately surrounding Mrs. Musgrove were the little Harvilles, whom she was sedulously guarding from the tyranny of the two children from the cottage, expressly arrived to amuse them. On one side was a table occupied by some chattering girls, cutting up silk and gold paper, and on the other were trestles and trays, bending under the weight of brawn and cold pies, where riotous boys were holding high revel, the whole completed by a roaring Christmas fire which seemed determined to be heard, in spite of all the noise of the others. Charles and Mary also came in, of course, during their visit, and Mr. Musgrove made a point of paying his respects to Lady Russell, and sat down close to her for 10 minutes, talking with a very raised voice, but from the clamour of the children on his knees, generally in vain. It was a fine family peace. Anne, judging from her own temperament, would have deemed such a domestic hurricane a bad restorative of the nerves which Louisa's illness must have so greatly shaken. But Mrs. Musgrove, who got Anne near her on purpose to thank her most cordially again and again for all her attentions to them, concluded a short recapitulation of what she had suffered herself by observing, with a happy glance around the room, that after all she had gone through, nothing was so likely to do her good as a little quiet cheerfulness at home. Louisa was now recovering apace. Her mother could even think of her being able to join their party at home before her brothers and sisters went to school again. The Harvilles had promised to come with her and stay at Uppercross whenever she returned. Captain Wentworth was gone, for the present, to see his brother in Shropshire. I hope I shall remember in the future, said Lady Russell as soon as they were reseated in the carriage, not to call at Uppercross in the Christmas holidays. Everybody has their state in noises as well as in other matters, and sounds are quite innocuous, or most distressing, by their sort rather than by their quantity. When Lady Russell, not long afterwards, was entering Bath on a wet afternoon and driving through the long course of streets from the Old Bridge to Camden Place, amidst the dash of other carriages, the heavy rumble of carts and drays, the bawling of newspapermen, muffin-men and milkmen, and the ceaseless clink of pattens, she made no complaint. No, these were noises which belonged to the winter pleasures. Her spirits rose under the influence, and like Mrs. Musgrove she was feeling, though not saying, that after being long in the country, nothing could be so good for her as a little quiet cheerfulness. Anne did not share these feelings. She persisted in a very determined, though very silent disinclination for Bath, caught the first dim view of the extensive buildings, smoking in rain, without any wish of seeing them better. Felt their progress through the streets to be, however disagreeable, yet too rapid. For who would be glad to see her when she arrived? And looked back with fond regret to the bustles of Uppercross and the seclusion of Kellynch. Elizabeth's last letter had communicated a piece of news of some interest. Mr. Elliot was in Bath. He had called in Camden Place, had called a second time, a third, had been pointedly attentive. If Elizabeth and her father did not deceive themselves, had been taking as much pains to seek their acquaintance and proclaim the value of the connections as he had formerly taken pains to show neglect. This was very wonderful if it were true, and Lady Russell was in a state of very agreeable curiosity and perplexity about Mr. Elliot, already recanting the sentiment she had so lately expressed to Mary of his being a man whom she had no wish to see. She had a great wish to see him. If he really sought to reconcile himself like a dutiful branch, he must be forgiven for having dismembered himself from the paternal tree. Anne was not animated to an equal pitch by the circumstance, but she felt that she would rather see Mr. Elliot again than not, which was more than she could say for many other persons in Bath. Does this include your family, Anne? She was put down in Camden Place, and Lady Russell then drove to her own lodgings in River Street. End of chapter. All right, you guys. So those were today's 2 chapters, and we had again a little bit of progress here, just wrapping up all the tragedy or the accident that happened in Lyme. Louisa is still alive. She is making she's making progress, though, you know, her nerves did suffer a little bit. She's still too delicate to be moved back home. Good. We don't want Louisa to die, of course. So all in all, you guys, it's now time for Anne to face Bath. We already know Anne does not like Bath at all. She hates the place. But what can you do, right? Let's see. So the next read along is going to be on Friday. Let me know what you thought of these 2 chapters. What do you think of Lady Russell so quickly changing her opinion about Mr. Elliot? And very interesting point, you guys. If you guys will remember just how strongly Mr. Elliot had really been against being a dutiful boy and like before, and now he is crawling back, or maybe I'm being too rough, but like he's now returned. Maybe he's not crawling back. Maybe he's like, I am now like a mature person, and I think it's beneficial to the family to like just sorry. It'd be beneficial for the family in general for us to be like make amends. So I don't know. We don't know what his intentions are. But at least we know that Anne, being in Bath, she will more likely not bump into him at least once. So we'll see. Remember, this is the guy that saw her at Lyme, and he looked at her, and it was very obvious that he thought her very pretty. So we'll see what he thinks. Now, Anne is very pretty, but Elizabeth is a showy beauty kind of deal. So maybe after seeing Elizabeth, he'll be like, yeah, Anne is cute, but maybe Elizabeth might be the one. I don't know. I'm just making conjectures here. I don't know. Like, remember, you guys, this is back in the day when people married their cousins, okay? So, anyway. All right, you guys, I will see you in a bit before I start spewing things that might be spoilery. Hope to see you Friday. Check out my Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, for updates on when I go live. Or if you want to receive Discord notifications, then you can do so by visiting my Ko-fi and just being like, I want to be a member, Magpie. Just, if you want to be a member, you can support me, and yeah, and I will love you forever. I know, Red Tempest, Sweet Home Alabama music, I know. Except that this is not the United States, so it will be, I wonder what is the equivalent of the South, like, Time Lord Boy, if you're still here. We have lots of stereotypes about, like, people who are kind of like Sweet Home Alabama, people that marry their cousins and are just, it's kind of like a negative stereotype, which I don't even think I should even ask about this. I don't want to perpetuate anything. Never mind, Time Lord Boy. Anyway, so I will see you guys on Friday. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.